The trophy room of the Crystal Palace sparkled with countless treasures from 1,000 worlds, each beam of light fracturing into rainbow patterns through the crystalline walls. Queen Dawn stood motionless before an empty display case, her iridescent skin pulsing with waves of deep purple, a clear sign of rage to those who knew how to read the Crystal People's colors. The Starweaver blade was gone. After 3 centuries of perfect security, someone had simply walked in and taken it. "Play it again," she commanded, her voice sharp enough to make the guard captain flinch. The holographic recording flickered to life in the center of the room. The security footage showed a single human male, dressed in plain black clothing, walking calmly through the palace halls. Guards passed him, as if he wasn't there. Security fields rippled around him, but never triggered. He moved with purpose, someone who knew exactly where he was going and what he was after. The footage showed him stopping at the display case. No laser cutting, no force field hacking. He simply opened the case, took the sword, and walked away. The blade, a weapon that could slice through battleship armor and channel the power of a dying star, went with him quietly, its usual golden glow seeming almost eager in his hands. "Impossible," Queen Dawn whispered, though the evidence floated before her. "The blade's genetic locks are keyed to my bloodline alone. No human should be able to even touch it without triggering the defense mechanisms." Captain Bright, her head of security, stood at rigid attention. His usual gleaming blue had faded to a worried gray. "My queen, we've analyzed the footage 100 times." He bypassed every security measure, as if they weren't there. "More troubling." He hesitated. "Speak," the queen commanded. The sword's own security systems should have turned him to ash the moment he touched it. Instead, the blade's aura, it seemed to welcome him. Queen Dawn's color shifted to deep red, a sign that even her legendary self-control was slipping. The last time anyone had seen the queen turn red, she had ordered an entire star system quarantined. "Find him," she said, her voice so cold it left frost patterns on the crystal walls. "Search every port, every station, every miserable human colony if you have to. That sword is more than just a weapon. It's the symbol of our empire's divine right to rule. Without it..." She left the thought unfinished, but Captain Bright understood. The Starweaver blade wasn't just a trophy. It was proof of the Crystal Empire's superiority, a weapon of legend that supposedly only the pure crystalline beings could wield. If word got out that a human had simply walked in and taken it. "One more thing," the queen added, studying the frozen image of the human. "When you find him, I want him alive. I need to know how he did this. And then I need him to suffer slowly enough to serve as an example for the next 1,000 years." As her guards rushed to carry out her orders, Queen Dawn remained in the trophy room, staring at the empty case. For the first time in centuries, she felt something she had thought her crystalline nature had evolved beyond: fear. The blade had gone willingly with the human. Somehow, it had recognized him as having a right to claim it. And that was impossible unless... No, she had erased those records herself, burned them from every database, modified the memories of everyone involved. That part of history no longer existed. Nobody could prove what really happened 50 years ago during the Horror War. Nobody could know the truth about where the Starweaver blade really came from. But as she stared at the empty case, Queen Dawn felt the carefully constructed lies of the past half-century beginning to crack, like crystal under too much pressure. And she knew, with a certainty that made her entire being pulse with fury, that this human wasn't just a thief. He was here to shatter everything she had built. James Stone sat in the pilot's chair of his small ship, the Wanderer, watching starlight dance along the blade balanced across his knees. The Starweaver blade hummed softly, its golden glow filling the cramped cabin with warm light. Most people would have locked such a precious artifact in a secure vault. Stone kept it close, letting it get used to him. "You remember, don't you?" he whispered to the sword. "You remember who you really belong to." The blade's glow pulsed briefly brighter, almost like a response. Stone smiled, reaching into his jacket pocket to pull out an old, worn photograph. The image showed a woman in a military uniform, her gray hair tied back in a neat bun, standing proudly with this same sword. The photograph was real paper, not a hologram, one of the few physical possessions his grandmother had left him. His ship's computer chimed softly. Approaching Crystal Empire border checkpoint, the AI announced. Should I prepare our usual smuggler's route? No, Stone said, surprising himself with how calm he felt. Set course for the capital. Standard approach, regular shipping lanes. We're doing this properly. They will arrest you immediately, the AI warned. The sword's theft has been reported across all channels. Stone ran his finger along the blade's edge. It should have cut him. The sword could slice through battleship armor. But instead, it felt warm and familiar. Can't steal what's rightfully yours, he said. And I'm not keeping it. We're returning it. He pulled up his research files on the main screen. 5 years of work spread out before him. Old military records, shipping manifests, medical data showing traces of human DNA deep in the sword's crystal matrix, and most importantly, a sealed file he'd found in humanity's first contact war archives. The file contained a single image, this same sword being presented to his grandmother, Catherine Stone, by a young crystal princess, the princess who was now Queen Dawn. She thought she could erase history, Stone muttered, scrolling through more documents. Erase what humanity did for her people. Erase my grandmother's sacrifice. His jaw tightened. But some things can't be erased. Some things remember. The sword hummed again, its glow strengthening. Stone had spent years studying crystal technology, learning their language, understanding their customs. But it was his grandmother's stories, told to him as a child, that had led him here. Stories about a war against something that ate stars, about an alliance between humans and living crystals, about a princess who begged for help and promised an ancient blade as payment. His computer chimed again. Capital Defense Grid detecting us. They're ordering us to stop for inspection. Stone stood up, lifting the sword. In the artificial light of the cabin, he could see his reflection in its perfect surface. He had his grandmother's eyes. Let them come. In fact, he smiled slightly. Send them a message. Tell them James Stone requests an audience with Queen Dawn. Tell them I'm here to discuss a debt that's 50 years overdue. The blade's glow built to a brilliant shimmer as proximity alarms began blaring. Crystal Empire patrol ships were moving to surround him. They're charging weapons, his AI reported. They won't fire, Stone said with absolute certainty. The sword won't let them. It knows the truth, even if they've forgotten it. He took a deep breath. The Queen thinks I stole this blade to embarrass her, but I'm bringing it back to remind her of something important. Through his view screen, he could see the Crystal Empire's capital planet growing larger, its crystalline cities catching starlight like 1,000 diamonds. Time to remind an empire that humanity keeps its promises, he said quietly, and that we expect others to keep theirs too. The sword's glow became a steady, confident light as the patrol ships drew near. Stone stood ready, knowing that the next few hours would either heal a 50-year-old wound between two species or start a war. He rather hoped the Queen was in a listening mood. Crystal guards lined the grand hallway leading to the throne room, their bodies glowing with combat energy. Yet as Stone walked past them, the Starweaver blade held openly in his hands. Something strange happened. Each time a guard raised their weapon, it powered down. Each time they tried to step forward, their crystalline legs refused to move. The sword was protecting him. Queen Dawn stood as Stone entered her throne room, her body pulsing between deep purple rage and shocked white. "How dare you enter my palace?" Her voice echoed off the crystal walls. "After stealing my most precious." "Your most precious lie. You mean?" Stone interrupted. He kept walking, steady and calm. The sword's golden light spread across the floor with each step. "The blade isn't yours, Queen Dawn. Or should I say, Princess Dawn, as you were known 50 years ago." The Queen's color flickered dangerously. Guards. Kill him. Nothing happened. The crystal guards stood frozen, their weapons dead in their hands. The sword's glow had filled the entire chamber now, and within that light, the crystal people's own technology wouldn't work against its chosen wielder. Stone reached into his jacket and pulled out an old-fashioned paper folder. "I brought copies for everyone," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the stunned silence. "Historical records, DNA traces, service logs, everything you try to erase." He tossed the folder onto the floor between them, and holographic images sprang to life above the papers. The Queen stared at the floating images, her color draining to a pale gray. There she was, 50 years younger, standing beside a human woman in a military uniform. The same woman from Stone's photograph, his grandmother. And between them, gleaming bright and new, was the Starweaver blade. "Impossible," the Queen whispered. "I destroyed all records of the horror war." Stone took another step forward. "Of the thing that was eating stars, that was heading straight for your home world. Of how your people, with all their advanced technology, couldn't stop it." His voice grew harder. "Of how you begged humanity for help." The sword hummed louder, and new images began projecting from its crystal core. The Queen's eyes widened as she recognized the sword's memory crystal activating, something that should only happen for her. The images showed battles among the stars, human ships fighting alongside crystal vessels against something dark and terrible. And leading them all, a human woman wielding a golden sword that cut through the darkness. "My grandmother," Stone said quietly. "Catherine Stone. The one you gave the blade to. The one who died saving your world." He lifted the sword, and its light became almost blinding. "The one you erased from history the moment you became queen." The throne room was absolutely silent. Even the Queen's advisors had backed away, their colors showing shock and confusion as 50 years of carefully crafted history began to crumble. "The blade remembers," Stone continued. "Crystal technology is alive in its own way. You can't erase its memories like you did your databases. You can't make it forget who its true wielder was, or the promises you made." Queen Dawn's form had become almost transparent, a sign of extreme distress in her species. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Stone held the sword point down, taking a formal stance that made several crystal nobles gasp in recognition. It was an ancient crystal empire gesture of challenge. "I want the truth restored," he said. "I want my grandmother's sacrifice honored. And," he raised his eyes to meet the Queen's crystalline gaze, "I want you to explain to everyone in this room why you betrayed not just humanity's trust, but your own people's honor." The sword's glow settled into a steady pulse, like a heartbeat. In its light, human and crystal beings stood facing each other, while 50 years of buried history rose up around them like ghosts demanding justice. The next move was the Queen's, and everyone in the room could see her running out of choices. Queen Dawn's crystalline form settled into a deep blue color, a sign of resignation among her people. She walked down from her throne, each step seeming to age her. "You wish to know the truth?" she asked, her voice different now, almost young. "Very well. Let me show you." She raised her hands, and the throne room's walls became screens, showing images from 50 years ago. The crystal nobles gasped as they saw their mighty empire as it once was, on the edge of destruction. "We were dying," Dawn said quietly. "The horror, as we called it, had already consumed 3 of our colony worlds. It was a living darkness between the stars, feeding on light and life itself. Our weapons passed right through it. Our shields meant nothing. And it was coming for our homeworld." The images showed crystal ships falling into darkness, their lights going out one by one. Stone watched silently, the Starweaver blade pulsing softly in his hands. "Then we detected a small ship," Dawn continued. "Primitive by our standards. Human-made. They had been watching our battles, studying the horror, and they had found something we hadn't." Her color rippled with old memories. The horror couldn't be killed by energy weapons or crystal tech, but it could be cut. Physical blades, properly enhanced, could harm it. New images appeared, human ships arriving, carrying soldiers with swords and spears enhanced by crystal technology. Leading them was Catherine Stone, Stone's grandmother, looking young and determined. "I was first princess then," Dawn said. "My mother, the queen, was too proud to accept human help openly. So I made a secret deal." She turned to Stone. "I offered your grandmother our greatest treasure, the Starweaver blade, a weapon containing the power of a dying star merged with human steel, in exchange for humanity's help." The walls showed the ceremony, young Princess Dawn presenting the sword to Catherine Stone. The blade's glow changed color as it bonded with its new wielder. "Your grandmother led our combined forces," Dawn continued, her voice growing thick with emotion. "The blade, it chose her, worked for her in ways it never had for us. She fought the horror in the dark spaces between stars. And in the final battle," the images shifted to show a massive confrontation near a dying sun. Catherine Stone, wielding the glowing blade, faced the living darkness directly. She realized the only way to defeat it was to feed it too much light at once, Dawn said. She flew into the dying star, used the blade to trigger an explosion that would feed the horror more than it could handle. She sacrificed herself to save us all. The throne room fell silent as they watched the star explode, taking both the horror and Catherine Stone with it. Only the blade survived, floating in space until the crystal ships recovered it. "I became queen shortly after," Dawn said, her color now a deep gray of shame. "And I couldn't bear for our people to know that we had been saved by humans, that our greatest weapon had chosen a human wielder, so I erased it. All of it." She looked at Stone. "I convinced myself I was protecting our people's pride, our divine right to rule. But really, I was just a coward." Stone stepped forward, holding out the sword. "The blade survived because it needed to remember," he said quietly. "It needed to remind us all that greatness doesn't belong to one species, that honor and sacrifice know no borders." The sword's glow spread again, but this time it was gentle, almost sad. In its light, Queen Dawn's crystal tears caught and reflected the truth she had hidden for so long. "Your grandmother saved us all," she whispered, "and I repaid that sacrifice with betrayal." She straightened her form, color shifting to a determined gold. "But perhaps it's not too late to make it right." The sword's light seemed to brighten at her words, as if approving this first small step toward redemption. The crystal nobles whispered among themselves, their bodies flickering with colors of shock and confusion. Queen Dawn's confession had shaken the very foundation of their empire's recent history. But admitting a mistake and actually making things right were two very different things. "Fine words," Stone said, still holding the Starweaver blade. "But words don't honor the dead. What are you going to do about it?" The Queen's color shifted to a deep purple again, but this time it wasn't rage. It was determination. "You're right. The time for hiding is over." She turned to address her court. "I intend to restore the true history of the horror war and honor humanity's role in our survival." A crystal noble stepped forward, his form pulsing with angry red light. "My queen, you cannot. It would destroy our people's confidence, shake the very foundations of our rule. The lesser races already question our right to." "Lesser races," Stone interrupted, his voice sharp. "We died alongside you. We bled with you. My grandmother gave her life for your world, and you still think you're better than us." The noble turned toward Stone, practically glowing with contempt. "One human sacrifice doesn't change the natural order. We are crystal beings, evolved beyond mere flesh. We—" "Enough." Queen Dawn's voice cracked through the chamber like breaking glass, but then she grew very still, and a dangerous gleam entered her crystalline eyes. "Though perhaps there is a way to settle this that would satisfy both tradition and justice." Stone gripped the sword tighter, recognizing the look on her face. What are you suggesting? The queen smiled, and for a moment she looked exactly like the young princess who had first given the blade away. Our laws are very clear about challenges to the crown's authority. When one party questions another's right or worth, she paused meaningfully. It can be settled by combat. The nobles immediately began buzzing with excitement, their colors flashing rapidly. Stone's eyes narrowed. You want me to fight you? Not me, Dawn said. My champion. Single combat, according to the ancient laws. If you win, I will not only restore the true history, I will commission a grand memorial to your grandmother and all the humans who fought in the horror war. Her form hardened. But if you lose, you will be executed as a thief and a liar, and this matter will never be spoken of again. Your Majesty, Captain Bright stepped forward, his color showing concern. The human has the Starweaver blade. It's too dangerous. The blade is exactly why this must happen, Dawn interrupted. If he truly has the right to it, as his grandmother did, then let him prove it in combat. If not, she shrugged her crystalline shoulders. Then justice will be served either way. Stone looked down at the sword, its golden light pulsing like a heartbeat. He could feel it responding to his emotions, to the weight of this moment. And your champion? Who would I be fighting? The queen's color became almost black with satisfaction. The Crystal Guard's finest warrior, the one who has never lost a duel. The one we call the Unbreakable. On cue, the throne room's main doors swung open. A massive crystal being entered, easily twice Stone's height, its form shifting between dozens of razor-sharp configurations. Where most crystal people were smooth and elegant, this one was all edges and points, literally built for combat. Do you accept the challenge, James Stone? Queen Dawn asked formally. Will you stake your life and your grandmother's honor on your skill with her blade? Stone watched the crystal champion approach, its form throwing off rainbow-colored light like a prism made of knives. The sword in his hands hummed, almost eager for what was coming. I accept, he said quietly. Let's show everyone what this blade can really do in the hands of a human warrior. The die was cast. Tomorrow at dawn, either the truth would finally be honored, or it would be buried forever, along with James Stone's body. The crystal arena sparkled in the light of 3 rising suns. Thousands of crystal beings filled the stands, their bodies creating a shifting rainbow as they moved. In the royal box, Queen Dawn sat rigid, her form a neutral white, as she waited for the duel to begin. Stone stood at one end of the arena, the Starweaver blade glowing softly in his hands. He wore simple black clothing, no armor. Against a crystal warrior, armor would only slow him down. At the other end stood the Unbreakable. In the morning light, the crystal champion was terrifying to behold. Its body constantly shifted between different weapon forms, now sprouting blades, now growing spikes, now extending into whips of living crystal. Remember the terms. The queen's voice rang out. Fight until surrender or death. No outside interference. The blade's power may be used fully. She paused. Begin. The Unbreakable moved first, crossing the arena with incredible speed. Its arms transformed into long crystal blades that slashed at Stone from 3 different angles. Stone didn't try to block. He ducked and rolled, letting the sword guide his movements. Your grandmother was a warrior. The crystal champion's voice rang like chimes. You are nothing but a thief playing with her weapon. Stone didn't waste breath responding. The sword was humming now, its golden light spreading up his arms. He could feel what it wanted him to do, how it wanted to move. Like dancing to music only he could hear. The Unbreakable attacked again, its entire body becoming a whirlwind of crystal blades. But where before Stone had dodged, now he began to fight back. The Starweaver blade sang through the air, meeting each crystal blade with perfect timing. Sparks flew as star metal met living crystal. The audience gasped as Stone's blade left glowing cuts in the champion's form, wounds that didn't immediately heal as crystal wounds should. Impossible. The Unbreakable growled, switching tactics. Its body reformed into a massive crystalline dragon, breathing beams of energy at Stone. But the sword seemed to drink in the energy, its glow becoming brighter with each blast. Stone spun through the attacks, moving faster than any normal human should be able to. Just as his grandmother had done 50 years ago, he was letting the blade fight through him. The sword remembers, Stone said quietly, pressing his attack. It remembers everything. The horror war, my grandmother, the promises made. Each word was punctuated by another strike, another glowing wound in the champion's crystal form. The unbreakable roared in frustration, its body cycling through a dozen different forms, trying to find one Stone couldn't counter. But the sword seemed to know them all, seemed to have an answer for everything. In the royal box, Queen Dawn's color had shifted to a pale blue of wonder. She was seeing what she had seen 50 years ago, a human and the blade moving as one, achieving things that should have been impossible. The end came suddenly. The unbreakable, desperate now, charged forward in its most dangerous form, a solid spike of living crystal aimed at Stone's heart. But Stone didn't dodge. Instead, he stood his ground and raised the sword. The blade's glow became blinding. In that moment, everyone in the arena saw something incredible. The ghostly image of an older woman in a military uniform, her hands overlapped with stones on the sword's hilt. The Starweaver blade swung down, trailing starlight. It met the charging crystal warrior with a sound like a bell ringing in space. There was a flash of golden light, and the unbreakable split in two, its perfect crystal form cut clean through. The pieces fell to either side of Stone, who stood unharmed in the middle of the arena. Complete silence fell. Stone raised the sword, its light now gentle again. "The blade has spoken," he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the arena. "Will you honor its judgment, Your Majesty?" All eyes turned to Queen Dawn. The truth could no longer be denied, not after what they had all just witnessed. The time had come to right a 50-year-old wrong. 1 month after the duel, the Crystal Palace looked very different. The trophy room that had once held the Starweaver blade had been transformed into a vast memorial hall. At its center stood a hologram of Catherine Stone, the blade in her hands, forever frozen in the moment before she flew into that dying star to save both humanity and the Crystal Empire. Queen Dawn stood before the hologram, her crystalline form glowing with a gentle gold that matched the sword's light. "Your grandmother would have been proud," she said to Stone, who stood quietly beside her, "though perhaps she would have found all this a bit excessive." Stone smiled, looking around at the memorial hall. The walls told the whole story now. The horror war, the human crystal alliance, the final battle. Crystal technology made the images come alive, letting visitors walk through the memories as if they were there. "The truth doesn't need to be excessive," he said. "It just needs to be told." The Queen's color rippled with agreement, and it has changed things as you hoped. 3 human colonies have already signed new trade agreements with us. 2 more want to establish joint defense pacts. She turned to face him directly. "Your people trust us more now that we've admitted our debt to them. Honesty usually works better than pride," Stone said. He looked up at the new plaque above the sword's display case, written in both human and crystal languages. "The Starweaver blade, symbol of unity between peoples." The sword itself rested in its case, but differently now. The display was designed so that both humans and crystal beings could touch it, activate it, learn from it. Its golden glow pulsed steadily, like a heartbeat, or perhaps like laughter. "There is one more thing," Queen Dawn said. Her form shifted nervously, showing bands of uncertain blue. "The Council has approved my request. We would like you to be our first human ambassador." Stone turned to her in surprise. "Me? After I broke into your palace and stole your most precious artifact?" The Queen's color became amused purple. "After you reminded us of our honor, you mean. Besides," she gestured at the sword, "the blade chose you, just as it chose your grandmother. That means something to my people now." Before Stone could answer, a group of young crystal beings entered the hall. They stopped in awe when they saw the queen, but their attention quickly turned to the human beside her. "Are you really him?" one of them asked, their form flickering with excitement. "The one who fought the unbreakable. The one whose grandmother saved us from the horror," another chimed in. Stone looked at their eager faces, seeing none of the prejudice that had once been so common. These young ones had grown up with the true history. To them, humans weren't lesser beings. They were allies who had proved themselves in battle. "Yes," he said simply. "Would you like to hear the story?" The young crystal beings gathered around as Stone began to speak. Queen Dawn watched with satisfaction as human and crystal children alike learned about courage, honor, and the power of truth. Her color shifted to deep gold, the crystal expression of contentment and hope. The Starweaver blade glowed in its case, its light touching everyone in the room equally. It had taken 50 years, but at last it was serving its true purpose, not as a trophy of crystal superiority, but as a bridge between peoples. In the hologram above them, Catherine Stone smiled down at her grandson, at the queen, at the future she had died to protect. The light of a dying star had been transformed into the dawn of a new age, and in the heart of the Crystal Palace, truth and legend had finally become one.